Dave Mustaine has become one of music's most celebrated performers. But now, at the age of 63, leader of thrash metal band Megadeth, Dave Mustaine has finally broken his silence. Dave Mustaine's journey to stardom is nothing short of legendary. Born in 1961, Mustaine's early life was filled with hardships, but it was music that became his ultimate escape. By the time he was a teenager, he was already playing guitar and was deeply immersed in the world of rock and metal. His big break came in 1981 when he joined Metallica, one of the most well-known bands in the burgeoning thrash metal scene. Mustaine's intense guitar skills and fiery personality helped shape the early sound of the band. However, his time with Metallica was short-lived. After a series of personal conflicts, substance abuse problems, and tensions with bandmates, Mustaine was kicked out of Metallica in 1983, just as the band was starting to gain significant momentum. For most musicians, such a setback might have been devastating, but for Mustaine, it became the fuel for a career that would redefine thrash metal. Instead of giving up, he channeled his anger and frustration into creating his own band, Megadeth. Mustaine quickly recruited talented musicians, and the band's formation was the beginning of something special. Their debut album Killing Is My Business, and Business Is Good, released in 1985, immediately caught the attention of metal fans worldwide. While the album wasn't a commercial smash, it was a powerful statement showcasing Mustaine's sharp songwriting, blistering guitar solos, and unique style. Megadeth's follow-up album's Peace sells. But who's buying? And so far, so good. So what? Took the band to new heights both creatively and commercially. Their aggressive sound and thought-provoking lyrics, often dealing with politics, war, and personal struggles, set them apart from other bands in the genre. Meat quickly became one of the big four of thrash metal, alongside Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax. Mustaine's vision and leadership played a major role in crafting the band's distinctive identity, and by the late 80s, they were selling out arenas and gaining a loyal fan base. Through highs and lows, lineup changes, and personal battles, Mustaine never wavered. He was a relentless force in metal, never content with mediocrity. Megadeth's albums continued to evolve, with records like Rust in Peace, 1990, and Countdown to Extinction, 1992, receiving critical acclaim and solidifying the band's place in heavy metal history. Dave Mustaine and Megadeth became synonymous with thrash metal's glory days, and the band's rise to prominence became one of the most influential stories in rock history. It was one of those nights that Dave Mustaine would never forget, but it wasn't for the reasons anyone might expect. Usually, when people talk about Dave, it's about the music, the wild guitar solos, the thunderous performances, or the crazy stories that have followed him throughout his career. But this night, this specific event, would go down as a completely different chapter in the saga of his life, a chapter that nobody saw coming. It happened during a private event, one of those gatherings that were meant to be a low-key, behind-the-scenes kind of thing. There were no crowds, no screaming fans, just a few familiar faces and some friends hanging out. It was supposed to be just another night in the life of a rock star, the kind of thing that barely even registers in the bigger picture. But that night, everything changed in an instant. Dave was in a good mood. It was one of those rare moments where he wasn't under pressure, no new albums to promote, no tour dates to stress about. It was a chance to unwind. Everyone was having fun, chatting and laughing, and for a while, the weight of the world seemed to be a distant thought. But in a split second, things took an unexpected turn. A kiss, completely unplanned, just happened. It wasn't something that Dave had thought about or even considered. In the moment, the kiss was just there. No one was expecting it, not even Dave himself. It wasn't something he could explain clearly at first. It just felt like the kind of thing that sometimes happens when you're caught up in emotions. Too many things running through your head, all the stress, all the pent-up feelings. One moment you're laughing, and the next, it's like something takes over and you act without thinking. It was a split-second decision, and it left everyone in the room staring, unsure of what had just happened. The kiss wasn't planned or something Dave had intended. It wasn't meant to be a statement, and it wasn't something that defined who he was. But that didn't matter. It was enough to stir up a media storm that no one was ready for, especially not Dave. The cameras snapped, the phones came out, and suddenly, the event that was supposed to be private turned into a spectacle. People were talking, texting, and within minutes, the story had gone viral. Fans didn't know how to react. There were the die-hard supporters who said, "It's just a kiss, who cares?" Then there were others who felt betrayed, confused, maybe even disappointed. The question on everyone's mind was, what does this mean for Dave? Was this some hidden part of him that nobody had known? Was he saying something about his sexuality? Was he trying to make a statement about identity? Or was this just a moment of pure emotional impulsiveness? The media didn't help. They took the story and ran with it. Headlines screamed about the unexpected kiss, and the speculation about Dave's personal life spiraled out of control. Fans who had followed him for decades, who had seen him as a larger-than-life figure, were now faced with a side of him that was entirely new, one they hadn't been prepared to see. Some tried to make sense of it, while others just wanted answers. People wanted to know why. Why had this happened? Why had Dave done it? Was it some form of rebellion, a reflection of his inner struggles, or was it just a moment of weakness? But for Dave, it wasn't about any of those things. It wasn't about who he kissed or why it happened. It wasn't about making any kind of statement or change. It was just a spur-of-the-moment decision, a single act that wasn't meant to define him or his career. Yet it was doing exactly that. It was the kind of thing that, once it happened, you couldn't take it back. It wasn't like anything else he had ever done in his life. There were no rehearsed lyrics, no guitar riffs, no prearranged plans. It was just one human moment in a lifetime of them, and it was now out in the open. As the news spread like wildfire, Dave found himself facing an emotional toll he hadn't expected. In the spotlight for years, he had become used to the media's scrutiny. But this was different. This wasn't a bad review or a public feud with another musician. This was personal. This was something that hit him in a place he wasn't prepared to defend. He wasn't sure how to handle it, and in some ways, he didn't know if he even wanted to. In the following days, Dave struggled to come to terms with what had happened. It wasn't just about the kiss anymore. It was about the fact that his personal life was now on display, like it or not. He wasn't sure what to say, but he knew he couldn't remain silent. He owed it to his fans to at least attempt an explanation, even though he wasn't entirely sure what he was explaining. The truth was, he didn't have all the answers himself. He wasn't sure why it happened the way it did, but he knew it wasn't as simple as the media was making it out to be. Dave wasn't ready to label himself or put his personal life into any kind of category. He had always kept his private life under wraps, and now, in an instant, that was shattered. The kiss wasn't a declaration of anything more than what it was, a brief emotional moment. But the public wasn't going to let that go. The media demanded answers, and fans expected some sort of explanation. For Dave, the whole thing felt overwhelming. Questions came fast, and the pressure to answer them came even faster. In the end, Dave did what he had always done, he faced the situation head-on. He admitted that it was a mistake, that it was an impulsive act, and that he had not thought through the consequences. He was open about the emotional strain he had been under, the years of personal struggles, and the toll that fame had taken on his mental health. The kiss, in his eyes, was just another moment where his emotions got the better of him. But to the world, it was far more than that. To them, it was a scandal, a headline, something that would follow him for years. The fallout was inevitable. Some fans turned their backs on him, not understanding, not willing to accept that this wasn't some grand revelation about Dave Mustaine. Others rallied around him, offering support and understanding. The whole situation left Dave in a place he wasn't sure how to navigate. He was used to handling the tough stuff, facing addiction, band drama, and health scares, but this was different. This was about his identity, something that, for once, he wasn't sure how to define or explain. Through it all, Dave kept pushing forward. He kept doing what he did best, making music. The scandal became just another chapter in his long, complicated life, but it wasn't the defining one. It was a moment, a fleeting second that spiraled out of his control. But it didn't define him. It didn't change who he was at his core. It was just another obstacle, another challenge to overcome, another story to add to the legend that was Dave Mustaine. The days following the kiss were, for Dave Mustaine, a blur of emotion and confusion. It wasn't something he had anticipated or even understood at the time. The world had reacted to the moment in ways he never imagined, and now he was left to pick up the pieces of a life that seemed to be unraveling. The media frenzy surrounding the kiss was overwhelming. And as much as Dave had experienced being in the public eye for decades, this was different. This time, it wasn't about the music. It wasn't about his guitar solos or the albums he had put out. It was about him as a person in a way that he wasn't ready to confront. He had always been a private person, fiercely protective of the parts of his life that didn't involve the band. Sure, he'd been through scandals, public fallouts, and media storms in the past, but this was personal. More personal than anything he had ever faced. For the first time in his career, Dave wasn't just the face of Megadeth or the guy who wrote songs about war, politics, and personal struggle. He was now the subject of a different kind of discussion. He was the man who had kissed another man in public. It was a topic he hadn't asked for, and it was one that seemed to follow him everywhere he went. The press didn't help. They twisted the story, picking apart every word in action, reading into things that Dave didn't even fully understand himself. Headlines screamed about his sexuality, his choices, the kiss that changed everything. The rumor mill churned out all sorts of wild theories, some far-fetched, others more grounded but still speculative. And in the middle of it all, Dave was expected to say something, to explain himself in a way that made sense to everyone. But how do you explain something you don't even understand yourself? How do you tell people something that, in the moment, felt like nothing more than a spur-of-the-moment decision, a fleeting emotional release, but was now being dissected like it was the most significant event of your life? Dave was angry. He was frustrated. But more than anything, he was exhausted. It wasn't just the public reaction that wore him down. It was the constant pressure to perform, to always be on, to never show weakness. He had spent so many years cultivating an image of strength, of defiance, of someone who could overcome anything. And now, here he was, vulnerable in a way he had never been before, exposed to the world in a way that didn't feel like a choice. The anger boiled inside him, not at the world or the fans, but at himself. He was mad for not thinking things through, for allowing a moment of weakness to spiral into something bigger than it needed to be. But as the days turned into weeks, Dave found himself in a place where he had to confront the reality of the situation. He could run from it, ignore it, but that wasn't who he was. He had always faced his demons head-on, and this would be no different. So, in an attempt to regain control of the narrative, Dave did what he did best: he spoke. He didn't do it for the media, didn't do it for the fans or the critics. He did it for himself. He owed it to himself to set the record straight, to say something that was real, something that felt true to him. The words he spoke weren't rehearsed. They weren't prepared. They came from a place of deep reflection, from the emotional toll of dealing with something he never expected to happen. He explained that the kiss wasn't a declaration of anything about his sexuality or his identity. It wasn't an act of rebellion or a grand statement about who he was or who he wanted to be. It was just a moment of weakness, of stress, of emotions that he didn't know how to handle. The pressure of his life, his career, the constant demands of being in the public eye had built up, and in that one instant he acted without thinking. It wasn't something that defined him, he told the world. It wasn't something he had planned or even considered. It was just a fleeting act, something that, in hindsight, he wished he had never let happen. Dave's voice shook when he spoke. There was no bravado, no arrogance. This wasn't the man who had stood in front of thousands of screaming fans, commanding their attention with his guitar. This was a man, just a man, who was trying to figure out what had gone wrong. He spoke about the difficulty of navigating a life in the public eye, how every move he made was scrutinized, how he had never really been allowed to just be himself. People expected him to be perfect, to always know what he was doing, to always be in control. But he wasn't, and that, he said, was the hardest part of it all, admitting that he wasn't in control, admitting that he had made a mistake. In his statement, Dave didn't try to justify his actions. He didn't try to make excuses or shift the blame. He took full responsibility for what happened. He acknowledged the hurt and confusion it had caused, especially for the fans who had supported him for so long. And he understood why some people might feel betrayed. He wasn't expecting everyone to understand, and he wasn't asking for forgiveness. What he wanted, what he needed, was for people to see him as a human being, not just as the rock star they had put on a pedestal. He needed them to understand that he too had struggles, that he too made mistakes, and that he was trying to move forward, to learn from this moment. The response to Dave's words was mixed. Some fans were supportive, expressing their understanding and appreciation for his honesty. Others were more critical, saying that he should have known better, that someone in his position should have been more careful. But for Dave, the most important thing was that he had said what he needed to say. He had opened up, exposed himself in a way that he never thought he would, and in doing so, he began to heal, not just from the public fallout, but from the years of pent-up emotions that had built up inside him. The kiss, in the end, wasn't the defining moment of his career. It was a mistake, yes, But it was also a turning point, a moment where he realized that even legends have their flaws, their vulnerabilities, and that it was okay to not be perfect all the time. For Dave, the emotional toll was significant. The kiss had been more than just an impulsive act, it had forced him to confront a side of himself that he had spent years hiding from the world. It made him reflect on his life, his career, and the way he had always kept things bottled up inside. But in the aftermath, as he took responsibility for his actions and opened up to the world, he started to see a way forward. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about being real, about facing the parts of yourself that are hardest to confront and learning to move forward, not in shame but with the knowledge that you are more than your mistakes. The emotional toll of the kiss wasn't just about the scandal, it was about the realization that Dave Mustaine was, in the end, just like everyone else. He was a human being, with flaws and struggles, and he wasn't immune to the pressures of life. And that, perhaps, was the most difficult lesson of all. After the storm had settled and the dust from the kiss had begun to dissipate, Dave Mustaine found himself standing at a crossroads in his life and career. The incident, though it had shocked the world and fractured the connection he had with some fans, hadn't broken him. Instead, it had forced him to look at himself in ways he had never done before. It was a moment of vulnerability, a moment that left him raw and exposed. But it also made him realize something profound: he had a choice. He could let this moment define him, or he could use it as a stepping stone towards something greater, something more authentic. Dave had always been a fighter. Whether it was battling addiction, fighting to keep me going through turbulent years, or pushing through the physical pain caused by the health problems he had dealt with over the years, he had always been someone who didn't back down easily. But this time, the battle wasn't just about the next album or tour. This time, the battle was within himself. The kiss had shown him that, despite all the accolades, despite all the success, there were parts of his life that were untouchable, parts of him that had been hidden even from himself. It had forced him to acknowledge the fragility that had always been there beneath the tough exterior. In the wake of the media frenzy, Dave didn't retreat into silence. He didn't hide away and let the world dictate how his story would unfold. Instead, he decided to embrace the future, his future, with a sense of honesty he hadn't allowed himself before. The kiss might have been an impulsive act, but it opened doors to conversations Dave had been avoiding for years. He began to speak more openly about the pressures of fame, the toll it took on his mental health, and how difficult it was to live up to the expectations placed on him by fans, the media, and even himself. For the first time, he was admitting that there were cracks in the facade. But that didn't mean Dave was done with music, far from it. If anything, the aftermath of the kiss gave him a new sense of purpose. For decades, he had poured his soul into his work, each song a reflection of his experiences, his pain, his triumphs, and his battles. But now, he felt like he could add something new to the mix, something deeper, something more real. He was still Dave Mustaine, the guitarist, the frontman of Megadeth. But he was also Dave Mustaine, the man who had seen the darkest parts of himself and lived to talk about it. That authenticity would now flow into his music, into his lyrics. And so Dave set out to reclaim the narrative. Mead continued to tour, but the approach was different this time. There was a new energy in the band, a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just playing the hits, they were playing from the heart. Dave's vulnerability was evident in his performances. He wasn't just a man standing on stage shredding solos, he was a man who had lived through pain and confusion, and he was letting his audience in on that journey. He spoke openly between songs, not just about the music, but about life. He talked about the importance of mental health, of taking care of yourself, of being kind to others, and, more importantly, to yourself. The fans who had stood by him all those years recognized this shift. They saw the man behind the legend, the struggles he had faced and the strength it had taken for him to stand in front of them and still perform. But there was something else that changed after the kiss. Dave's relationship with his bandmates evolved. The fallout from the media frenzy didn't just affect Dave, it affected the entire band. There was a period of tension, a moment where it felt like the bond between the members might be fraying. But as with all things in life, time has a way of healing wounds, and through their shared experiences, the members of Megadeth came out stronger. They began to lean on each other more, to be more open with each other, to communicate not just as musicians, but as people who had been through the ringer together. The kiss had forced them all to confront their own vulnerabilities, and it made them better, both as a band and as friends. Dave also made a conscious effort to repair some of the relationships in his personal life. The kiss had shown him that there were things in his life that needed attention, things he had ignored for too long. There were people he had hurt, people he had distanced himself from, and he knew that he had to take responsibility for that.